President of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. It's a pleasure to welcome you all tonight to our very special event with our guest of honor, Arati Prabhakar, the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the President's Science and Technology Advisor. We live in a time of inflection where around the world crises take up a great deal of time from policymakers and frankly are difficult to deal with given our moral imagination. We think about the war in Ukraine playing out right now, the way it challenges our norms of international law and human decency, the horrific conflict that began with the terrorist attack in Israel and is now playing out in Gaza, the painful realities of conflict in different parts of Africa. But all of this is happening against a backdrop. And that backdrop is a story of human progress, but also a story of struggle and difficulty to develop a positive and an appropriate relationship with technology. The entire story of human history in recent memory, certainly since the Industrial Revolution, is that story of our engagement with technology. How does it change us? How do we change it? How do we govern it domestically, internationally? And as we confront the reality that our advances in artificial intelligence further accelerate this progress, we are in the middle of a moment of great possibility, considerable risk, opportunity, and challenges to our governance institutions. When I think, for example, about the extent to which the changes in artificial intelligence, not just in our lifetime, but in the last decade, in the last few years, challenge the imagination, I think about that EOS supercomputer that NVIDIA has stood up, that in about 4 minutes trained a 175 billion parameter model with 1 billion tokens of data. 4 minutes. And I think about the ways in which over the course of the next few years, we will be probably confronted with models that are 10 times, eventually 100 times, maybe even 1,000 times more powerful than the GPTs that have become so popular in such a short amount of time. I cannot think of somebody better to work through these issues, to talk through some of the major policy changes, including not only the UK summit, but more importantly, the executive order the Biden administration just issued, than Arati Prabhakar. She is somebody I've had the pleasure of knowing for many, many years. She's somebody who has taught me a lot, somebody whom when I met her, well before she was the president's nominee to be OSTP director, I thought to myself, she should be OSTP director. Correlation is not causation, but I'm just saying. And our conversations spanned the nonprofit she created to deal with issues like climate change, the work she had done as a venture capitalist, trying to align private sector incentives with what's socially beneficial, the experience she had as a 34-year-old leading the National Institute for Standards and Technology at the Commerce Department, her life as an academic, and her record as a storied director of DARPA. All of that, I think, has prepared her as well as anybody I know to lead OSTP and to help us think through this generative moment, no pun intended, in the history of humanity's relationship to technology. Welcome, Dr. Prabhakar.
Well, thank you, Tino. That was such a sweet introduction. And I've been watching with you and your colleagues here, your partners, and some of the most thoughtful work on artificial intelligence has come from this group. And so it's just a particular pleasure to have a chance to talk AI with everyone here. I'm pretty sure we're going to have a rich discussion. So let me kick it off, and I will start simply by saying that AI is one of the most consequential technologies of our times. And President Biden and Vice President Harris have been clear from the start that we have one job in dealing with it, and that is to manage AI's risks in order to seize its benefits, very much as Tino alluded to. So as was mentioned, the president just signed a very broad and exhaustive executive order. It's a landmark EO that is the most significant action anyone anywhere in the world has taken to deal with artificial intelligence. It addresses safety and security. It protects privacy and it protects from discrimination. It focuses on workers and it boosts innovation and competition. It advances American leadership in the world. And there's a lot more to be said about that, but this EO is part of a broad and comprehensive strategy, and that's really what I'd like to step back and talk about this evening, because that's really what undergirds everything that you'll see us doing in the Biden-Harris administration. So that strategy starts with understanding the implications of this richly complex technology. And very much to Tino's point, the whole history of humans is that we've used powerful technologies for good and for ill, and artificial intelligence is going to be no different. Generative AI, of course, just burst on the scene this last year. There's just been this astounding acceleration in the ability to generate text and images and video and audio. And these are the ways that we communicate, and that's why generative AI, I think, has seized the imagination of millions of people around the world. But of course, it's only one of this broad class of machine learning enabled AI. This is the AI generation that we're in today. And of course, these are computational systems that people train on data and then use to make statistical estimates of all different sorts. And here we are in the age of information, so there's a nearly endless variety of different kinds of data to train on. And generative AI, of course, is trained on text and media of all different sorts. But other AI models, of course, can be trained on sensor data and scientific data. They can be trained on administrative data and financial data, and they can be trained on all the data that's generated when billions of us are online every day clicking and surfing our way around the internet. So what that means is that the applications of AI are extraordinarily broad, and each one of those has a bright side and a dark side. So, think about it. A car designer knows that AI can be used to make cars that are much safer, but it can also be used to lull drivers into complacency. And biologists know that AI can be used to design cures for intractable diseases, but it can also be used to create biological threats that are worse than what nature serves up. If you think about banks and mortgage lenders, if you think about hiring managers, they all know that AI can be used to speed up application processing, but it can also in that process embed discrimination. Workers know that they might be able to use AI to do more and to earn more, but also that it can be used to surveil them. It can hollow out and even eliminate jobs. And in our personal lives, of course, AI is behind every online experience that we have, whether you're hunting for a recipe or a bargain, whether you're hunting for a community or a mate. And we know that in those interactions, AI can erode the integrity of our information environment, that it can erode our privacy, and for our kids, for way too many of our kids, it can erode their mental health. So these are just the implications that we already know about, and that's a pretty long list to start with. And we know, though, that this technology surprised us before. It's going to surprise us again. We're going to pursue advances in AI technology because of the phenomenal opportunities they bring, and we just have to be clear that every one of those advances and opportunities is going to come with additional and sometimes fresh kinds of risks as well. And although the AI community mostly talks about the what, the technology, it's really the who that's responsible, because it's people who build AI systems, it's people who choose what data to train them on, it's people who decide what to automate and what to connect AI systems to, and ultimately it's people who choose how to use the systems that we're building. So this duality of bright and dark, that's the nature of powerful technologies. But the story of how the future unfolds, that depends on our deeply human choices. And those choices are being made around the world today because every nation is racing to use AI to build a future that embodies its own values. And here in the United States, we disagree about many things in this juncture in our history, but I'm sure we can agree on one thing, and that is that none of us wants to live in a future that's shaped by technologies that have been defined by authoritarian regimes. And that is why President Biden has been clear from the start that American leadership in the world today requires American leadership in artificial intelligence. And that means getting it right at home, but it also means working with our allies and partners around the world. That's also why it was essential that when we started our work in the Biden-Harris administration, that we started with great clarity about our values. And we did exactly that, and we did it even before chatbots captured the imaginations around the world, because it's a year ago in October of 2022, that we published a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. And this is a document that puts a stake in the ground about what we value as a nation. It talks about safety, privacy, freedom from discrimination. And here we are in these choppy waters with this rapidly changing technology. There is no more important time to steer by the light of these fundamental values. That's where we start. Now, the next step is to have a clear understanding of AI's complexities and its subtleties. And I want to make a few points here. The first is that all of our hopes for wrangling AI depend on robust tools and methods that tell us how safe, how effective, how trustworthy is a particular AI model. And that we all understand that that's what we need, but we also have to be clear, today the AI community has just barely begun to address that challenge. That's an extremely tough thing to have those tools and methods, and we've just barely started. This period in AI technology, to me, is like medicines before we had clinical trials, because remember, you could market a potion to anyone you wanted. You could tell them it was going to cure. It might cure them. It might kill them. We didn't really know, and we have got to get from this Wild West period, if you like, into a future in which people who develop AI systems and people who use AI systems have those capacities to really know what the quality of a model is. So that's an important factor to keep in mind. Another factor that we have to recognize is that it's taking fewer and fewer resources to develop highly capable AI models. It's not that long ago, it was just the start of 2023, when most people assumed, I think at that time it was a good assumption, that table stakes to build an interesting AI model, a powerful AI model, was probably $100 million. But a lot has happened in those months since the start of this year, and through a whole set of advances, better engineering, more efficient algorithms, but also open source models that are now out in the world. These have dramatically changed the amount of time, really dramatically reduced the time and the cost to get in the game. And so now if you look around the world, there are many organizations and companies who are developing powerful general purpose models for under $1 million. And then if you look at what people are able to do customizing models that are based on open source, those can be turned into specific, fairly powerful, narrower applications just by using a few hours of effort on commodity hardware, just off-the-shelf computing. That's $100, not $100 million, but $100. So we're in a very different world. If I were still a venture capitalist, I would say, well, the technology is democratizing. If I were still in the Defense Department, I would say the technology is proliferating. Both of those statements are true. And we just have to be clear that as we do the work of policy and figuring out what the practices are going to be for artificial intelligence, we have to account for the reality that AI technology today is widely available and it's spreading fast. The third point I want to make as we think about the landscape here is that we also need to be deliberate as we're assessing AI's most consequential risks. There's a lot of discussion about catastrophic risks, and we actually have to be serious about catastrophes that come in many different forms. The ones we usually talk about are the kinds that could play out in just weeks or months, because if AI is used to launch a cyber attack on critical infrastructure, or if it's used for a bio attack, that could lead to societal scale disaster relatively quickly. There are other cases, though, where the time period could be years. Think about amplified and distorted information that undermines mutual trust, that over time can even undermine the idea of truth itself. That could take somewhat longer, but when that happens, the consequences are also quite catastrophic. And some harms play out over an even longer time frame. Think about the decades and lifetimes that are involved when a job isn't won or a mortgage isn't granted. Those are the things that mean dimmer futures for parents, but also for their children. President Biden often says that America is an idea of hope and opportunity, of possibilities, of giving everyone a fair shot. We've never fully lived up to it, but we've never walked away from it. If we allow AI to be used to automate and magnify discrimination at scale, that can be catastrophic to the very idea of America. So these are some of the things that are the really important factors as we contend with this potent and fast-changing technology and its broad applications, its broad implications. Let me turn to what it is we're doing about that. Our goal is clear, stated at the top and set out by the President and the Vice President. The goal is to manage AI's risks so that we can seize its tremendous opportunities. And the administration's work to that end has been illuminated by extensive discussions with researchers, with companies, with people in civil society. That included some very lively exchanges at roundtables where the President or the Vice President met first with a group of AI CEOs, then with a very interesting roundtable with critics and experts, and another with civil society leaders. It also included hundreds of individual conversations with people who are investing in AI, building AI, people who are using AI, and people who are affected by AI. And it includes hundreds of responses that we got to our request for information on AI priorities. And we need all of those perspectives. I know a lot of them came from people in this room and the organizations that are here and online. We're very grateful for that input. We want that continued engagement because it informs our work, but also because this is work that all of us need to step up to. It's going to take all parties stepping up to play their part. So let me outline the actions that we've taken. With the President's leadership, 15 leading AI companies now are implementing voluntary commitments that relate to safety, security, and trustworthiness. The administration is working with our allies and partners around the world on AI governance. That includes the G7 Hiroshima AI process, as well as the UK's recent AI Safety Summit. We're also consulting with our allies and partners on next steps at the United Nations. And we have ongoing conversations with Congress on a bipartisan basis as they're considering legislation. But while all of that is going on, at the same time, the President and the Vice President are completely clear that the executive branch must lead by example. And so this administration has moved with great urgency to take action on these two fundamental responsibilities of government. First, to manage and to mitigate the wide variety of AI risks and harms, but also to use AI in powerful and responsible ways for all public missions. And that is happening through a whole series of steps. Federal agencies have announced a host of individual actions. We've mentioned the executive order that was just signed a couple of weeks ago, and immediately on its heels, the Office of Management and Budget has put out proposed policy to guide all agencies in their use of AI. All of those actions together, that is dozens of individual actions that reflect the great breadth of AI and its applications and all the issues that it comes with. So I'm not going to go through the couple of hundred pages that these measures amount to. I will warn you that if you feed it into your chatbot, you should please check the original before you believe anything that you hear. We've tried it, and it's pretty interesting, but it's not completely right, so just note. So let me just summarize what's in there, and I'm happy to get into this in the discussion. But let me just summarize that with these actions, what we're doing is addressing risks to civil liberties, safety risks, and risks to the integrity of information. We're building the capabilities to do this vital job of being able to test and validate AI systems. We're starting a compute and data infrastructure to support AI research. And to do all of this work, we're launching an AI talent surge because we need to keep bringing all kinds of great people into public service to do this. So this is the work that's essential to manage AI's risks and to put AI's power to work. with strong focus and leadership from the president and the vice president, we're making important progress today on AI. So let me just wrap up by saying, why are we doing all this work? This is actually not easy. This is a huge hassle. It's an enormous set of challenges. Here's why we're wrestling with all of them. The reason to keep building AI capabilities is this. AI technology can help us achieve our great aspirations. And in fact, without the power of AI, I don't know if we're going to get there. So this is actually critically important. AI is already part of how companies are building products and services to compete around the world and to provide good-paying jobs that support families here at home. It's already part of how the Defense Department is building for the next generation of military capabilities for a changing set of threats around the world. AI is starting to open new ways for students to learn and for workers to train for new skills. It's starting to play a role in medical diagnosis and treatments, and it's starting to change the way in which government agencies provide all the essential services that they provide and how they interact with their citizens. That's pretty exciting, but much more is ahead. And when you glimpse what's happening in research today, you can start to see what that future might look like. What you'll find is researchers are working on using AI to be able to predict extreme weather patterns zoomed into 1 kilometer over days and weeks and months. Researchers are working to use AI to predict earthquakes days to a week in advance. Think about that. Anyone else from California? Like, that's a huge deal if you can do that. Researchers are using AI to translate neural signals in real time to control the muscles of individuals who've been paralyzed. They're using it to design materials with seemingly impossible properties. They're using it to design promising antibiotics for antimicrobial resistant infections. These are the kinds of advances that open the door to a future in which we meet the climate crisis, in which we strengthen our economy and bolster global stability and security, in which we achieve robust health, and in which we open opportunities for every individual. If we do this right, we can use AI to knock down walls and break through barriers so that we can achieve these great aspirations. It is such an honor and a privilege to get to work with all of you and the many other people who are so serious about this great challenge. I think about the generations, so many generations that came before us, experts and advocates, companies and policymakers, individuals and communities. They made pivotal choices about powerful technologies. Now it's our turn. Let's get AI right. Thank you so much. Check this here.
Thank you very much, Director. That's terrific. Let's start with a general question. The policy community watching this executive order and seeing the process of getting it implemented is thinking about the balance between regulation, the role of government, and innovation.
Yeah.
And if you zoom out a little bit and think about the executive order in the context of the semiconductor restrictions as well and everything else that's happening in government, there's probably a concerted effort to get that balance right. Take us inside that a little bit. Tell us how you and your colleagues thought about how to make sure you struck the right balance as you thought about reporting requirements, tripwires of when a particular model training run needed to be reported, in some cases restrictions on foreign persons that can work on training of these models. Like, how did you think about, and your colleagues, about striking that balance?
There are a lot of details, but here's what I think really matters. I've spent my whole professional life in science and technology and innovation, and the reason those of us who get to do this work are lit up about it isn't for the sake of innovation itself. It's in order to make a future that's better for people. And to do that, I think we tend to think in this trade-off, but I think it's a little bit different. If you think about the brakes on your car, I think you'd probably say they're there to slow you down. But brakes are actually how you go fast around curves, and that's what we're trying to get right, is the amount of control and governance so that we can go fast around curves with this technology. That's what's behind all the thinking. What you see is the best snapshot we've got today, and built into that is the idea that we know we're going to have to adapt because the story of this technology is just starting to unfold.
So for example, just to elaborate on that idea, it sounds like what you're saying is it's a helpful thing if the government has a little bit of access into who's doing the training of the most advanced models so that we can anticipate problems, challenges, try to avoid the kind of backlash that might later lead to a slowdown in the innovation process. I'll note that.
Or harms, right? I mean, really what we're trying to make sure we get ahead of is the kinds of harms that can spin out of control.
Speaking of that, one other interesting thing in watching the process of the executive order culminate in the document itself, which, as you say, is quite long now, there was a state of the world where the executive order could have been pretty narrow, could have been national security driven, focused on biosecurity, cyber risks. Instead, we have a document that deals with immigration, labor, discrimination, bias, national security as well. So give us a sense of how these different meetings with the president and your own deliberations ended up resulting in something broader.
Yeah, we've had such great conversations about this. And look, to start with, this president is so clear about the power of this technology. And in every conversation any of us have had with him at the White House, he says the same thing that you hear publicly from him. Every single time he talks about artificial intelligence, he always talks about the amazing things we're going to be able to do and the serious risks that we have to manage. And so number one, I think keeping bright and dark in frame all the time was essential. That came from the top, and it was very clear to everyone that that's how we needed to approach AI. And then, again, it's such a broad technology, and everyone I talk to in the world, every company, every organization, every individual, tends to have one thing that they are very passionate about, a risk that they're very worried about that affects them or their community, a technological capability that they're excited about. And that's great. It leads to a cacophony in the discussion, but I think that's good, and I think it's very healthy. The work that we do, we're doing it for the United States of America, and we don't get to just pick one thing. We have to keep the entire set of risks, harms, and opportunities in frame. And I'm very happy that the executive order reflects that, because I think that is the appropriate, for the country and for the world, that all has to be kept in frame, and I think we were able to do that.
Building on that, I want to ask you about borders a little bit, both the borders between the U.S. and other countries, but also to some extent the divide that sometimes people point to between Washington, D.C. and Silicon Valley, which is a divide you've traversed.
These are our two homes, so yes, we see the divide.
Let's start with that one then. So one common sort of narrative, and you can maybe opine on how much you found this to be true or not true, is that the world of Silicon Valley is one where Washington, D.C. is far away. The lawyers are not the ones calling the shots. It's an engineering-driven culture. There's an outward-looking orientation, very much focused on innovation, maybe a little bit of impatience with government. And then here, of course, in D.C., again, the narrative might be there's a little bit of a difficulty in getting a full picture of what's happening inside these companies and understanding how decision-making there works. What have you found to be the currency of that divide, and how do we bridge it?
I love your an exercise in anthropology, listening to you describe these two communities, so that's wonderful.
I probably think of individual people who would be
and I think the thing I would add on Silicon Valley is I don't know how much, I mean, yes, there's still an engineering-driven aspect to it. The thing you didn't mention is it's about making money, right? I mean, it is about how can you create enormous wealth, and it's by doing technology at massive scale and reaching people. And I've worked with so many great people in Silicon Valley who are genuinely doing this work because they see it as a way to reach the world at scale. And there's no question that's one thing that happens with technology. But I think it's important to just say that, especially over the decades, it has also become a very market-driven, a very money-driven culture. And yes, and I think Washington has its own blinders on, but again, by and large, people come to work here, I think almost without exception, people come to work here because they want to get it right for the country, and they know that that's important if we're going to lead in the world and play our role in this complex world. So what I find when I peel all the layers back, here are the things that we all agree on. We all agree that we should know how safe and effective and how trustworthy a model is before it rolls out. There's a very foggy conversation, I would say, about what that means because we don't have good tools and capabilities to do that today. And when we talk about compute thresholds for reporting, or when we talk about where will open source go, in a sense, those are proxies for really the thing that we all do agree on, which is we need to make sure that we need to know how safe, how effective, and how trustworthy a system is. And I think that one thing we can all agree on that we are now working towards between the voluntary commitments and what we're doing in the executive order is to start building that foundation that I think will allow for a better conversation between these two still somewhat very different worlds, right?
Another critique one hears from one of those worlds, and perhaps related to your point about the conversation, is that the human capital inside government, present company excluded, and some other great people we could point to, but as a general matter, if you think about the scale of the U.S. government, the capacity it has to grab the talent it needs, to incentivize that talent and infuse its decision-making with that talent, it can be a challenge. So what do you think we can expect over the next, first of all, in the near term, over the, say, 180 days that these broad policies are turned into action in terms of teams of government officials? Do they have the right human capital? And also, how do we think about filling those gaps going forward?
Yep. I think any large organization you talk to today, public or private, will tell you that they know they've got to deal with AI. They know there are opportunities to be seized, and they've got to be serious about it, and they are trying to find that talent. So I think that's definitely true, certainly true across government. I had the great privilege of leading DARPA for 4 years, and I'll tell you that's an environment where, like everywhere else, if you don't get the right people, you can't do the things that you need to do. The reason we were able to hire phenomenal people to be program managers in that environment, often competing with salaries that were much higher, often competing with options that promised unbounded wealth, none of which I could provide from DARPA. But the reason I got great people was when people saw a place where they could come do something that moved the needle and shaped the future. And that's the moment we're in right now with AI and AI talent coming into government. The people we've got in government doing that work are amazing. And as they come and as their friends see what you can do when you have a place to stand and a big lever, that's how I think we're going to be able to recruit big people, really great people. And this is one of the things that the president was clear about in the executive order is we've got to have this surge of talent. And we've done it before, and I'm sure we're going to be able to do it again. We're seeing some great resumes show up.
When I think about the scale of the ambition in the executive order, which partly I think is premised on the reality that Congress may well step in with some clarity on some of these areas that the executive order addresses, but it will not happen in a month or probably in 3 months. Are there provisions that you think are going to be a little more honestly daunting for the government to move on? I mean, given that the range of ambition there reflects a full, whole of government approach.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of homework in this executive order, and there's no question about it. Its breadth means that there are many different parts of government that need to do things. And there are organizations that have gotten huge assignments. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the Commerce Department. They have to stand up and play a really significant role if we're going to get this business of the tools and methods to know when our systems are working. So they've gotten some extraordinary large assignments. But the assignments go to everyone. And the thing I want to share with you, Tino, is that one of the things that's been so much fun about this is when we had a cabinet meeting where the president used a section of that to talk about artificial intelligence. We've had principals meetings where we have all the senior leadership across government focused together in a room at the White House, focused on AI. And the spirit in those rooms, people are lit up about this opportunity. It's a chance to seize a new technology, to get it right, to do the work in a new and a fresh way. And it's a chance for leadership that people, I think, are very excited about. So I think that energy is the homework that's been assigned is immense. The time frames are short. It will definitely be a challenge. But I think there's a lot of excitement to get it done.
Terrific. Speaking of leadership, the executive order and the other policies that the administration has put into place, put into motion, give the U.S. an opportunity to lean into a leadership role in the broader global discussion of where AI is going, what its impact will be on humanity, and how to govern it. But it's a crowded space. Think about the UN just stood up a high-level advisory panel. The OECD is doing work on this G7, the Hiroshima process, the UK Safety Summit, which is going to roll into a set of continuing activities. Where do you see the U.S. leadership role, and how do you think you and your colleagues are going to strike a balance between the needs of the American people, as it were, concerns like U.S. competitiveness, and the broader kind of international set of concerns and priorities?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's like every other field, right? We'll compete economically. There are conflicts around the world and different values and different views about things. But there's a lot that has to work for every country, and especially for our like-minded allies and partners. We have shared values, we have shared broad objectives, often very different ways of approaching it. What I'll say about all of the different fora that you mentioned, they're different. They're bilateral or multilateral groups, but they're also all focused on somewhat different issues. The UK AI Safety Summit focused on some narrow safety issues that they were particularly focused on and concerned about. The G7 process with Hiroshima is more about codes of conduct for companies. And so, again, it's broad, and so different fora are approaching different aspects of the problem. What does this mean for the United States? Well, leadership in this complex world, first of all, means being thoughtful and getting it right for us, being respectful of our allies and partners, but then deeply engaging with them. And what I think you'll see in every readout from every other interaction with every other head of state that the president has had in this last year, artificial intelligence comes up. It's front of mind for not just us, but for many, many leaders around the world. And I think we are in a moment, especially with the leadership that our companies have provided on the technology side, we have the great opportunity to lead by getting this right, but I think also a responsibility to step into that role. And people are looking to us.
To your point, one interesting thing about the AI policy discussion right now, from my perspective, is the leading private sector companies that are at the frontier of the technology seem quite public about the concerns they have about making sure they get the safety right and trying to figure out ways to work together, hence the Frontier Model Forum. But it does sort of leave out there a daunting question about what happens if we don't get this proliferation stuff right. So let's stipulate that obviously any effort to restrain the access to technology globally, even domestically, has its downsides and its risks. We don't want government to have too much power either. But supposing that two trends in particular accelerates, one is the interest in open source models, the other being the point you referred to involving the declining cost of training these models.
Yeah.
What happens if 3 or 4 years from now, models much, much more powerful than GPT-4 are freely available all over the world? How do we think about the security challenges there and what we as a country might do about them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because there are costs to constraining technology, but also it's like trying to hold mercury in your hand. The ingredients to build powerful models are compute and data and algorithms, and those things are in abundant supply, especially as the threshold for really powerful models drops so quickly. So I think that's exactly the right question. And I think it's important to understand for each of the different application domains, it's important to understand the role that AI plays. It's in so many cases, it's an accelerator, sometimes a phenomenal accelerator of capability, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum. And just as an example, one of the measures in the executive order that's aimed at the bio threats that emerge as AI gets more and more capable, one of the measures in the executive order focuses on how we manage the provision of DNA sequences. This is about biological technologies, which is another powerful technology that's surging ahead. But it's already possible today to go to multiple vendors and buy sequences of DNA or RNA to stitch together in your own lab whatever it is you want to build. A phenomenal advance for all the good things that we need biotechnology for, but also it comes with its own dangers, and then that's amplified by AI. So when you think about that problem from a systems context, understanding what those nucleic acid sequences are all about is actually a pretty important lever in managing and mitigating, reducing that risk. And I think it's a good example of, yes, we may look at that problem more seriously because of the acceleration of AI, but the measures that would actually make a difference maybe you really have to understand the system to figure out what the other levers are.
So as I reflect on this, it sounds like you're pointing out that we're not wrong to think about the security risks associated with high-end frontier models, particularly the generation of models coming, in 9 months and 12 months and 18 months. But to your point, the most dangerous threats might be ones that require a system-wide approach, well beyond what you can deal with just within the four corners of AI policy.
Yes, but I think AI becomes a window to understand those, and because it is such an accelerator, I think it really demands that we take some of these other issues like biological threats. It demands that we take them very seriously.
So sticking with the borders stuff, we've had this conversation in the G7. At the UK summit, there were a number of developing countries represented. But as the discussion moves, as it likely will, to the G20, with Brazil as president, it's interesting to sort of ask how India, China, Brazil, Indonesia will engage in this discussion. How do you expect that might shape the discussion about AI over the next few months and years?
You tell me what you think about that. I think that's the kind of thing you all think about a lot. I mean, I'm very interested to see, because we tend to talk about it in a binary, but there are so many different approaches and ways of thinking about this. What do you think is going to happen?
In all the time I've had this job, nobody's ever turned the question on me.
I'm good at finding good resources.
No, clearly. I'll speculate with you a little bit, but I'll note we have people in the building thinking about this very issue right now who are going to be more thoughtful than I am. But I'll observe this. I was struck at the UK summit by the gap between the top-of-mind concerns of the representatives from the US, the UK, and a couple of other countries that are really at the frontier of technology, and the number of thoughtful and articulate representatives from countries like Indonesia, Brazil, that underscored that there was a real economic agenda there for them, that they were thinking about very large populations at very different points in economic life, and the imperative of lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty just makes the conversation start in a different place. Doesn't mean it'll necessarily end in a different place. I didn't get the sense that they were casting aside the security issues completely, although it could get tricky potentially once you get to the question of, does a security rationale appear to be restricting access to certain technologies that those countries feel like might help them around agriculture, climate, extreme weather, and so on. But at least there seemed to be a hope of reaching a destination together, even if the starting point was different.
And to me, that really underscores why mitigating the risks is so foundational, because we and they want all of those amazing things that are going to come. And I think that's why we've got to get this work done.
So you were a bona fide scientist. You have a PhD in applied physics from Caltech. Rumor has it you might have been the first woman to ever get a PhD from Caltech in applied physics.
In that small department, yeah.
Okay.
Just to be clear.
A number of us do not have PhDs in applied physics from Caltech. So two questions that follow from that. One is, how do you see the frontier AI technology changing the scientific process, material science, the bioengineering stuff we were talking about, quantum, stuff you dealt with at DARPA?
It's blowing up the scientific process in the best possible way. It's just, the possibilities are just expanding so quickly. This was the exact subject of the last time the president met with his Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. And we have a Nobel laureate in cosmology. We have an amazing superconducting materials expert. We have one of the most famous mathematicians in the world. This is a guy who, when we all go to a group dinner, kids are stopping by to get a selfie with him. He's a mathematician that everyone wants a selfie with, right? So this is Terry Tao, amazing people. And these three individuals, what they did at the last PCAST meeting was talk with the president about how AI is changing our ability to design materials, the kinds of new materials we're going to need for our clean energy future. Think about the kinds of batteries we really need. They need properties that we don't know how to design today. But AI is going to open that up. Saul Perlmutter who's the Nobel laureate in cosmology, was talking about how our theories of the origin of the universe are being stood on their head as the James Webb Telescope and other instruments are bringing home more and more dazzling images, but images that don't fit our theory. And he was talking about how AI is going to change how we model the almost 14 billion year history of the universe in ways that start explaining that. And Terry Tao talked about how AI is going to change how we model weather extremes and understand what to prepare for with a changing climate. So it's a time when people's eyes are popped open and they are doing amazing research that AI is enabling.
In that vision, I almost think of scientists as prompt engineers. Not only that, of course, but I mean, think about it, right? Here they are increasingly engaging in a process of co-evolution and co-discovery with a technology that takes their ideas and percolates them in 100 ways. That does raise, an issue that is dealt with in the executive order that's a tricky one. And it's also one that clearly can impact geopolitics. And that's how labor and the process of work gets affected by all this. Now, we both know a number of economists, labor economists, who are cautiously optimistic. They'll point out that, of course, if you make any individual more productive by empowering that individual with technology, well, then that individual in principle at least can command a higher wage and so on. But there are a lot of nuances and tricky twists and turns in those kinds of arguments.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing on that score? What do you think is important for society to be preparing for, thinking about on the labor side?
Yes, this, again, the executive order recognizes that the story of especially how generative AI affects jobs and employment and the future of work, that story is just beginning. And so part of the work ahead is to really understand that. I think what we know from how technology has changed work in the prior eras of the information revolution, just these last few decades, we know that it has fundamentally transformed work. We know that it doesn't always show up immediately in the productivity numbers, but we know that it often has required a fundamental restructuring of organizations and the whole enterprise, and not just a simple one-to-one replacement. So it's, there's things you can anticipate from that. I think we've also seen jobs that have upskilled and that have allowed individuals to do a lot more and to bring home more in their paychecks. And we've seen jobs that are hollowed out. And I think the question, and this is why don't we get ahead of that this time, and why don't we ask the question now about what we can do to shape the course of the technology and how it's used so that it becomes a tool that empowers workers. This is what people are striking over. It was integral to the actors' strike. It's part of what workers are thinking about and concerned about. But I think we have a chance to put this on a path where workers help shape how this technology is used, and they become part of harnessing it so that they can do much more. That's the best way that this can come out, and I think there are active steps that we can take.
Just to extend that point, in some ways, the actors and the writers are in a special position. They're not a huge group of people. They command a great deal of public attention and concern. They're coming at this at a moment where it's still possible to strike a bargain. I wonder, and this, question for all of us to think about, but you're right in front of me, so I'm asking you, just sort of how that plays out at scale with millions of workers. Union density is low in the U.S. That has various consequences, pros and cons, perhaps, but it does raise the question of how or whether that example scales in any way, or whether it's kind of a one-off, and the reality is a much more haphazard one for the vast majority of workers in America.
Well, I think haphazard, we know how to do haphazard, right? We've done this before. But I think history tells us that we can do better than that. And I think, yes, where there are unions, I think this will be for many professions. Because, of course, what's happened with generative AI is that it's not just the professions we all thought were going to get automated, but now it's the things that we thought were really just the realm of people. And so, this script writers, but writers of all sorts, and graphic designers, and law clerks, and I think it's going to be a while to really sort out what those things all mean. But where there are unions, I think they can really do some important work to help shape that future. But I think we can, I think we can get people to come together and think about the measures that would get us on a better path in some of these other areas as well. And I think that's, why not try a different way? Why not make new mistakes this time?
Fair enough. It's a risky thing to predict the future, but if you were to just make some educated guesses about the future we might imagine in 10 years, with the progress of this technology, the labor issues we've talked about, the security concerns, the whole of government approach to try to steer us to a place that's reasonable, what do you see as the benefits that might be shareable with a very large group of people in the U.S. and the world? And what do you still see as dangers and risks in that future?
Well, I can't imagine a future where we say, we're done. It's now safe, it all works, and clear sailing. Because I think we're going to be wrestling with these issues forever. And in fact, the whole point here is to build our muscle so that we get really good at wrestling with these risks. I do think that we can get to a point where, for each application area, the people who use AI and the people who are affected by AI have enough confidence that we can start reaping its benefits in a very significant way. And what I think that looks like is taking a lot of the hassle out of a lot of things that are bumpy and difficult to do today. Just think about just all the services that government provides to its citizens, every way that we interact and provide information or provide services. Those are very complex today for reasons that simply don't have to exist if we can harness AI effectively. So I think the pain threshold drops for some of the things that should be easy but aren't today. And then what I'm really excited about is the things that seem impossible today that then become just the way we live. And I think that can happen in 10 years because I can see it changing.
One example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now we're living in a period of climate change that has affected virtually everyone in this country, whether it's floods or wildfire or smoke from wildfire, whether it's storm surges, whether it's the extreme heat that we experienced. And our ability to look into the future today is it's better than it was, but it's still not good enough to really make specific plans. I think in 10 years' time, we'll have the tools that allow us to plan, the tools that allow us to have the near-term visibility when there's something that could be disastrous coming. And I think that's going to help us become much more resilient in the face of one of our biggest challenges right now.
What's the best thing about being the President's Science and Technology Advisor, and what's the hardest thing?
Oh, the best thing is I love this innovation engine that we have because it changes what's possible for our future. And we have so many things, so many hard things that we have to do today. But our job is to build the hope that makes it possible to do those hard things in the future. And that is just a phenomenal delight.
When you got your PhD, is this what you thought you'd be doing someday?
I didn't even know this job existed when I got my PhD.
What did you think you were going to do?
All I knew when I finished at Caltech was that I didn't want to be in a lab at 2 a.m. saying Eureka, and I'm so glad that there are people who want to do that. We just had lunch yesterday with 4 of the U.S. Nobel laureates, and these are people who that's where they want to be. But what I really love is how science and technology changes people's lives and changes the future, and so I stumbled into DARPA early in my career and never really recovered. So here I still am, turning up for public service.
Thank you for being with us tonight, and thank you for the
Thanks for the chance. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Tino. Thank you. Great to talk with you.